All right, looks like we are live on Standing for Truth. I want to welcome everybody to the epic showdown here between Luca and David. I'm just looking and loving both of their hats, so I appreciate them coming prepared. Luca, firstly, I want to thank you for filling in for Ryan. And so why don't we start with you just in terms of an introduction? How you doing today, Luca? And again, I appreciate it.
Well, I'm fine. I was, of course, in bed. Sorry if I'm not in the new studio, but as I said, I have some ether problems. Not because I do not have a gas. It simply broke, so it's quite cold up there. So old chicken, it's perfect. So it's a pleasure to be here. I simply love to discuss with Professor McQueen, and this will be fun. I tip my hat to the professor and cannot wait to begin. So, of course, I will go a little bit. I will go after the professor because I'm not prepared, but I'm more than willing to try my best. And
Well, it's
this
Battle of the
will be
Professors
fun.
today, Luca. So I appreciate the fedoras. And secondly, I must say this worked out nicely because Luca Medugno, he's had a debate in the past on Noah's Ark. And so it's not like this topic is a mystery to him. He's debated it before, he understands it well. And for the audience's sake, what is the topic exactly? It is the great Noah's Ark debate. Specifically, David McQueen and Luca Medugno are going to be debating the question, is Noah's Ark feasible? And Professor McQueen, good to have you as well. I appreciate you giving us your time for this debate. How you doing today, brother?
I'm so thankful to debate my friend in the middle of the Italian night. I have to go back over some of the Italian that he's taught me in the past. See, I think it's pronounced high regone. In other words, I agree with you or something. And then I'm supposed to say to you, mia capisci.
Luca mi capisci.
Just like the grandfather.
Can you understand me?
Godfather. I mean, I'm the grandfather. Somebody else is a godfather. Okay. I'm ready now that we've got this out of the way.
Well, David and Luca, you guys are always good sports. You both disagree, but you both exemplify what a professional and sophisticated and respectful debate should be like. So with that, David today is technically in the affirmative, since the debate title is Noah's Ark feasible? And so we're going to allow David to start us off. We are going to be having up to 12-minute opening statements. Whatever time is not used in the opening statements, we can throw into an audience question and answer period. We will have an up to 8-minute rebuttal. Then we'll have a short break, 5 to 10 minutes, where the debaters can, take a little break, get a coffee, get a tea, whatever it is. Might be a little late for Luca to have a coffee, but nonetheless, whatever you gentlemen would like to do during that break time. Then we'll get into a 30-minute back and forth discussion where David and Luca can discuss the topic for the night, asking each other questions. Then we'll get a 5-minute closing statement in, and then we'll do some audience questions. So make sure you're tagging me with your questions at Standing for Truth, and that way I won't miss them. So with that, Professor McQueen, appreciate your patience. We're good to go.
Very good. If you'll give me a full screen, I want to make sure Luca can read what I've got written behind here. I may need to bring this whiteboard. I've moved my studio into my library, and so I'm experimenting with a new way for me to do this. And so can you see that inductive logic part, Luca? Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Let me go ahead and begin with my 12 minutes. As we have discussed before, both Luca and me, and then also my other debates, at Standing for Truth. As we've done this before, I've presented the argument that the Bible is a trustworthy historical document. So I have three major points I want to make about the ark and its feasibility. But I want to start with the data on the ark. And I want to do it in a sense not of deductive logic, but rather of, not deductive logic, but inductive logic. Now, for some of you that don't remember this from the past, deductive logic is a way of dealing with things kind of from the top down. Inductive logic, you gather data and then you go up the scale to see what that data might mean. And so that's the meaning of this inductive approach that I want to begin with. Where do we gather the data? Those of you that have your Bibles, you can turn to Genesis chapter 6. Perhaps by next year, I'll learn enough Italian to be able to read this in the Italian, but I'll use English for now. And let's see what the Bible actually says about this ark of Noah and its dimensions. Let's begin in chapter 6 and verse 15. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. I'm reading from the King James. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth 50 cubits, and the height 30 cubits. Now, Dr. Henry Morris, my mentor, always used to say that the dimensions of the ark were ideally designed both for stability and capacity. And that is one of the arguments that I'm going to give to Luca as the night goes on. I've actually pulled up the wrong one there. This is the one we want. The ark was huge. That's my first argument, Luca. It was both a barge and a refuge. Later on in our discussion, I'll talk about the refuge part. Understanding that we have an international audience, I've converted some of these values from cubits to feet and to meters. With the help of a friend, I cut a piece of wood to the dimensions of the ark. Now, the most critical dimension that we're going to debate is the 1-to-10 ratio. The fact that it was 300 cubits long, 30 cubits high. Now, that is the 1-to-10 ratio that's going to be so important. If you are a sailor, the width is also called the beam of the ark, and that is 50 cubits. Now let's do some conversion to our international audience. The cubit is the length from the tip of your finger to your elbow. Now, ironically, this model I made is a cubit long. And so that's what a cubit is. And converting that, we get this. 450 feet, 140 meters. The 1-to-10 ratio is easy to calculate. So that means that the height is 14 meters rather. The 50 cubit beam or width is 75 feet or 23 meters. That makes a critical ratio of 10-to-1. But we can go beyond that to some very interesting bits of data. We can elaborate on this later on, but there are 3 stories in the ark. Each one of those is 33,000 square feet or 3,200 square meters. the details of how much water might be needed and so forth, we'll save for the discussion. The next point I want to make of the three is the issue of what is meant in the book of Genesis by kind. I'm not going to argue tonight the way that my colleagues that I'll meet in heaven one day argued in 1700 and 1800. The kind is not a species, but rather the kind, okay, let's see. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Donny just sent me a note. One of the books in my library is A History of World War II, written by Shirer. And that might be misunderstood as some sort of neo-Nazi symbol. Okay, now that I've got that gone, let's go back to this. For tonight's debate, I want to define genus. I want to define kind as genus. And if the word kind in the Bible means the genus level, that means that there are 8,000 genera, according to work by Jan Petschkus back in 93. But let's use that 16,000 number to debate Luca. 16,000 dinosaurs, cats, spiders, snakes on board the ark. But notice what happens if a kind is equal to the family level. Well, at the family level, there are only 2,000 kinds. Male and female would make 4,000 different kinds of animals. How much time do I have left, Donny?
Good question, Professor McQueen. You just hit the 7.5 minute mark,
okay,
so you've got
good.
about 4.5 minutes.
Good. I can spend some time on this third point. The third point I want to make is not only was the ark a huge barge, and not only were there really a limited number of creatures on board, dinosaurs, cats, snakes, spiders, 16,000 of them. But one of the most interesting things that has been argued over the years is the X-bar, or the average size of a creature on board the ark. If you go back to the work of Dr. Henry Morris in the 50s, he calculated the average size to be that of a sheep. The man named Jan Petschkus, who wrote so many definitive works about the ark and its capacity under the nom de guerre called John Woodmorape. John, in the years that he was a teacher in the Chicago area and was unmarried, he had time to go to the library weekend after weekend. I could have never done this, but he did do it. Now, these are given as adult sizes. These are adult sizes. So there are 900 genera of creatures that breathe air that are between 1 and 10 grams. Think in terms of a hummingbird. There are over 2,000 genera that weigh 10 to 100 grams. Think of a rat. But here's where it gets very interesting. Here's my model of an African elephant. Hippos and so forth. there are only 250 genera of creatures that weigh between 1 ton and 10 tons. Now, a ton in the English system is 2,000 pounds. And you can, of course, divide that through to get the weight in kilograms. Think of a hippo or an elephant in that regard. But there are only 53 genera of creatures like dinosaurs that weigh between 10 and 100 tons. The weight, and I have it in my notes here, to give you an example, the weight of an African elephant like this is about 8 tons, 5 to 8 tons. So it fits in this hippo category. The really big ones are dinosaurs. The argument that has been given over the years dealing with this whole issue of is the ark adequate is people said, oh, come on, McQueen. Are you saying that essentially 2
1 minute.
dogs, thank you, that 2 dogs got on board the ark, and from those dogs, we have everything from a little bitty tiny chihuahua to a huge boxer? Standing for Truth, Donny himself has talked a great deal over the last year about the issue of diversity and so forth. And that issue of diversity allows us to go from 2 dogs with tremendous genetic potential, mutts, if you will, and then by selective breeding to breed small dogs and large dogs in the time after the flood. Thank you, Donny.
Okay, Professor McQueen, thank you so much for that 12-minute opening statement. And Luca, we are going to hand it to you as well. Feel
Yes.
free to take up to the same amount of time whenever you're ready.
I have my old slides.
Sure.
I can put that up. Maybe I can help. And then I have one additional point. So, give me a second.
And I'll just let the audience know I'm all up to date on questions. And so if you've got ARC and flood related questions, feel free to tag me. I will save those for the audience.
Okay,
Q&A
you can
portion.
see my old slides.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, let's roll. So very rapidly. I want to be fast. It was a mythical vote. I think that there was a vote, of course. I do not think that was that big. I have slightly different measure from Professor McQueen. Why? Because we do not know how much was cubit, because was a measure taken by the human arm, and so it varies through time. So my first point is for sure the population, because you have a lot of animals and you have to feed and care for them. So the life inside the boat is very a good point, because you need to survive inside the boat for a year or so a very long time. Back then I did something about if it was possible to attend to all those animals, and if you have small children, basically very small animals, you have more problem, because those animals are they need much care. If you have a very let's skip that. So that was the production of waste with those animals, and that's a problem because, of course, you will have gas, bad smell, a lot of it. I can say that a cow do not smell so well in the open. I cannot even imagine inside the ark. The illumination inside the boat is quite interesting. How was the boat lit? How Noah and his children and his wife see inside the boat? You have only one window. I think that for the first 40 days or so, you have rain, so not much light at all from the sun, and you need to see where you are going. Also think about the living condition of someone in the dark for 40 days straight. Yes, and I'm very curious about the kind of technology used inside the boat. We do not have any proof of that. The ventilation is a very important problem. With only one window, you do not have a very good ventilation, and that's a problem because gases and, of course, if you lit the place with lanterns and things like that, you will have problems with gases and carbon dioxide poisoning and things like that, or methane poisoning, because the animals will produce a lot of it. And yeah, that was sorry. Was seasickness a problem? I think it was. If you do not have some kind of technology to stabilize the boat, you will rock quite a lot, and you will have a lot of problem with it. And yes, those were the conclusion. So. Last, how many minutes do I have now, Donny? Okay, I will show another point. Professor McQueen, you ever heard about Irving Frescal? He's a British guy. He studied a lot Babylon and the myth of Noah's Ark. So if you know the guy, he did something really, really interesting. He did build an ark from a previous text, much older text than the Bible, and he did succeed in it. It was a very precise text, so I'm not blown away by the measurement of the ark. People back then, they were very, very smart. If you study a little about the period, the Bronze Age period, they were very, very smart. They had a very complex society. They were able to communicate through the whole planet, basically, and they had a lot of interesting things back then. Very rapidly, I will show the boat, and I will close my point. Okay. Irving Frescal. So, yeah, that's the guy, and that's the boat. He did all this. This is his book, and he did create this boat. It's a round boat. It's more than able to float. It's much smaller, but it was a very wonderful experiment. He did succeed to create it. So it's not like they did not have the technology back then. And that's a very interesting point. So I concede my time. I know that David lost a little bit of time because the whole situation. So I will happily give him more time to explain himself. If
Appreciate it. Okay, Luca. Well, thank you very much for that roughly 12-minute opening statement. Appreciate the visuals and the points from the both of you, David and Luca. Lots for us to discuss and rebut. And so, with that, David, we're going to hand it over to you for an 8-minute rebuttal. And whenever you're ready,
Okay, let me make my time mark here on my clock
sure.
for the 8 minutes, and then I'll know myself when to stop. Okay, good. I very much appreciate Luca's points, but I do need to critique some of the things that he said. Notice that one of his arguments was that there were 8 people on board the ark, and by his math, those 8 people would have to take care of around 250 animals apiece. Now, if I did my math right, which I think I did, that's taking care of about 2,000 animals. Now, you'll notice that if it's the case that the kind means the genus, then that ends up with 16,000. But maybe Luca is closer. Notice that if a kind is at the family level, then that gives you about 4,000 males and females to deal with. Now, here's an important point from Jan Petrus's research in the past, and I'll have Donny put the reference to his book, which is still available, at the end of our debate. But here is his overall calculation. The volume of the ark that I spoke of earlier is adequate in more than one way. Only 46% of the 3 levels of the ark would have contained animals. 12% would have provided adequate food, even if you don't factor in what's called a hibernation factor. 8% would of the ark would need to have contained water, and then an unknown amount of waste would be generated by the creatures. Even though I understand that Luca was using a vocabulary that there were 8 people on board the ark, you have to understand that they weren't just any 8 people. There was Noah and his wife, and then Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. They were chosen by God because of their belief in him, but in orchestrating the details of the ark, they had the genetic potential to produce all the national groups that we see today. In the U.S., we have an old song that Jesus loves everyone in the world, red and yellow and black and white. So all the different national groups, the evolutionary community likes to use the word race, but race is an inherently divisive and inappropriate term for what's being talked about in the Bible. Now, how can we imagine these 8 people taking care, and I'll use Luca's number, of 250 creatures per day, factoring out hibernation. So let's look at this in a bit of detail, and let's use what many people consider to be a real critique of the ark. And let's go ahead and use a dinosaur like I just dropped on the floor. I just dropped a stegosaurus on the floor. I hope he lives because we like having him around the house. No, let's take a small dinosaur, even a small T-Rex, for example, and have him come on board the ark, with his mate. Now, he would have been able to fit upon this huge barge. Were he adult height? Because remember that this barge is divided into 3 decks, and the ark is not what children portray as a little vessel like this, and then the creatures have their heads sticking out. That's not the biblical picture of the ark. It's a foolish picture of the ark. And let's ask ourselves the question, could these 8 people have dealt with all the animals on board the ark? Now, this is a cross section through the ark. These are the 3 decks, and then down below is where the waste would have gone. And if we extend this into 3 dimensions, these 8 people were, as Luca said, even using the Bronze Age analogy, these 3 people, or these 8 people, were very intelligent. And so the idea of an open flame that Luca seems so concerned about, they could have had an oil lamp which was firmly attached to the different work areas throughout the ark, and they would have had, I would be tempted to use cozy, but an adequate lighting source to do their work. Now, others that have studied the ark over the years since Dr. Morris first began looking into it in the 50s, and really this discussion goes all the way back to 1700 and even before, as the rabbis looked at the ark. If you imagine this in 3 dimensions, imagine there to be a group of slanted feeding trough areas so that water could be put in here and then it would flow down to the different areas. This floor, if I could draw the floor as a separate issue, here are the stalls, and let me use a different color of orange. Here are the stalls in it. If this was slotted through the stall area, the waste material would fall down into the bottom of the ark here. There would be a motion to the ark, but it wouldn't necessarily produce seasickness, because if you've ever been on a cruise, they advise you to stay close to the middle of the beam.
30 seconds.
Yep. Say it again.
30 seconds.
Stay close to the beam of the ship to avoid any kind of seasickness. Because God selected Noah and his family with foreknowledge, I can't imagine that would be a huge problem. What do you think of that critique, Brother Luca?
Okay,
Yes.
David. Thank you so
So I have a lot to say about it. First of all, those old slides, I feel embarrassed just to show them because I did get quite far away from that style, but still, I back then I did some maths on how much you need to care for just the cows because I did my math on just the cows, and you will need for as the Bible say 14 cows because it's seven pairs of animals for clean animals, if I remember correctly. You will need basically a ton of food each day. And of course, you can have technology to aid with your task, but I would love to see what kind of technology. They were smart, but the technology was not up to today's standards. And methane poisoning will be a huge problem, and a lamp will be very dangerous in that environment. You will be in danger because an open flame will be at risk to cause an explosion, and we do have some examples of that. So I cannot see 8 people caring for 14 cows all alone for all that period on a boat rolling like that with some days of storm, very heavy storm. I cannot see that happening. It will be, as I show, Arvin Frascal did a wonderful thing. He did find a text. It was from Babylon, if I remember correctly. I did not prepare for that. And he did recreate the boat to put a nail in this argument. All you need to do is to build a boat. Let's build a boat and let's see if you can put some people in it. You can scale the operation. Of course, you maybe can have a couple of persons, dudes, doing all the work for a fraction of the animals or things like that. And let's do this experiment. I cannot do it because, of course, it's a very expensive thing, but it will be peak science. Let's pick a boat, let's pick a good number of animals, and let's try it out if those people can care for these animals in that conditions. I think that you cannot have that kind of experiment with a boat like the Ark for a security reason. You will be in danger to kill someone, but you can have just the animals, a big boat, and 8 people in it. That would be a feasible experiment. I think it's impossible. You just for the cows, it will be near impossible to care for them. And I did my calculation taking in example animals of a years or slightly less of age. It's not like I taken older animals. In just 1 year, an animal can grow a lot. If you have a cow, it can grow basically reaching 700 kilos from a very small animal. So they grow fast. Those are my problems for this model.
Okay, Luca, thank you very much for that rebuttal. And that concludes the opening statements and the rebuttal. So excellent job to the both of you. As I said when we started, David and Luca, this is not their first rodeo. So they know this topic. It's not a mystery to them. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion period. But we do have a short 5 to 10 minute break. So our debaters, our awesome debaters tonight, can grab themselves a tea, a coffee, and basically just prepare for the discussion portion. So
thank you very much, Luca. I look forward to this
It was a
methane
pleasure.
argument when we get back.
Sorry if I jump from a thing or another, but
Oh,
making
we're
this
so
up as
thankful.
I'm going. So
We're so thankful that you got out of bed at 1 a.m. We expect you to make a pizza there behind you in your kitchen so that we can share.
it's
The
a
pizza.
little bit
And
a long process to make a pizza. So
if you make a
will
pizza,
be-
Luke, I'm flying over to Italy to have some
Yeah.
with you.
in 2
Luke,
years,
I
we hope.
can give you a pizza if you came here. I know just the perfect place, and
Oh,
I
good.
can buy you
In-
pizza. Don't worry
in-
about it.
In
Well, where
2
I
years,
live is actually famous for its pizza and shawarma.
Whoa!
So-
is that so?
Oh yeah.
Well, I hope that Ms. McQueen and I can visit in a couple of years. My daddy was in World War II in Sicily, and we'd like to start there and then work our way up. You are near the Po River Valley, as I recall. Is that true?
Yes, I'm very close to Milan. I do work in Milan, in fact, as a teacher. So yeah, I live 15 or so kilometers from Milan.
Milan.
So yeah.
Very good. I'll go get my coffee and be right back.
Okay, we'll see you soon, Professor
See you
McQueen.
soon.
And Luca, enjoy your break as well. For 5 to 10 minutes here, I'll go over some announcements to the audience. So if you're just joining us, it's good to have you. This is a debate currently between Luca Medugno and Professor David McQueen. Originally, and I will get a thumbnail change as quickly as possible. Originally, it was supposed to be a debate between Ryan Adler and David McQueen. And unfortunately, Ryan Adler was a no-show. I do hope he's okay. That's the most important thing. Hopefully there's no issues there. But Luca Medugno has debated this point in this topic in the past, and he's had numerous formal debates. So he's got a lot of experience in the world of debates. And so he filled in, and it's been an excellent debate so far. So we're also going to be having an audience Q&A. So just make sure you're tagging me with your questions. As a matter of fact, this is our last debate, believe it or not, for 2022 as we move into 2023. And so it has been a wild year. I think we've hosted, I'm just throwing a number out there, maybe 140 debates this year. It's been huge. We had over 50 just in the Evolution Debate Challenge series, but we also do debates on soteriology, eschatology, the nature of God, basically the Bible translation controversy. So if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button. Last night, we had the much anticipated debate between Grayson and Dr. Dino. This one did not disappoint. We had, at one point, 320 people live enjoying this epic debate. So if you haven't yet seen this one, please do check it out. It is uploaded on both this channel and Kent Hovind Official. So there's no excuse to not see this debate. It really was one to remember. But as soon as 2023 kicks off, we've got a solid week of debates. We want to start 2023 off the right way. We want to kick it off with a bang. And so we're going to have a King James only debate. Two true scholars here, true professionals, seasoned debaters. Nick Sayers, Turretin fan. So is the KJV totally free from all errors? We've also got the very next day, we're going to have the great rapture debate. And so I'm pumped for this one. Pastor Matt First, he's written books on the topic. Pastor Daniel Eldridge, he's written a book on the topic as well. So again, two true scholars coming at it. entering the debate octagon and debating the question, is the pre-tribulation rapture biblical? So you guys are not going to want to miss out on this one. This is going to be a sophisticated eschatology discussion. I can guarantee you that one. We had Pastor Matt First here last month for a debate against David Preston. They debated who is true Israel. And that really was a fantastic debate. It was about 3.5 hours. And they touched on just a ton of important points. So that's all going to be the first week of January. And so please make sure you're here for that. And just throughout the month, I've got a ton scheduled for everybody. We've got Dr. Dan Biddle from Genesis Apologetics. He's going to be back with us. This is going to be the third time he'll be here. We'll do it live. He's got another one of his awesome presentations, and we'll be taking audience questions. I've got Paul Price. He's going to be with me 2 times in January. So he's excited to enter the debate community we have here. And so he's going to be joining me here for a presentation or a discussion on refuting liberal scholarship on Behemoth. And so he's written an article on creation.com pertaining to this subject. And it's an excellent article. And so we are going to be debunking the compromisers. So your Heisers, Waltons, and the uninspiring compromisers out there. So you're definitely not going to want to miss out on this one. And he is going to be here. Not this one. He'll be here debating Snake was right. Is there evidence for the existence of God? So this one's going to be, I'm pumped for this one. Paul was here a couple years back. He debated Dr. Ron Garrett. Excellent debate on genetic entropy. It was a great format. It was very formal, but it was a thorough debate on genetic entropy. So if you haven't yet seen that one, please do check it out. And then we've also got the same week. So we've got the eschatology debate, the Bible translation debate, and then we've also got this debate between Grayson and Jamie from Studio 215 Official, Big Bang to Evolution. And so I'm definitely excited for that one. We've also got Josh Gibbs and Dan Chapa coming up. Both of these gentlemen, both of these brothers are seasoned debaters. They're going to be debating the topic of salvation. We've got Will Kinney and Dr. Stephen Boyce joining me for an informal discussion in January. And the Evolution Debate Challenge series, it continues into 2023. I'm already finalizing details in terms of at least 3 more evolution debates that I'm going to be fitting into January and then February as well. And so if you're new to this channel, or you've been watching debates on this channel for a while and you want to participate in a debate, whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist who would like to debate evolution, take the challenge, let me know. Shoot me an email. Even if you've already engaged in debates over 2022, we want to do our best to top 2022 with the Evolution Debate Challenge series. So shoot me an email. We are, I'm also interested in doing some more 2-on-1 debates, 3-on-1 debates. So whatever it is, I want to spice things up. So feel free to email me at standingfortruthministries@gmail.com, and we can have a discussion and basically just figure something out. So the last thing I'll say, and I think the debaters are back, I started my series, The Case for Separate Ancestry. It is loosely based off of my book, Special Creation, which goes into the best lines of evidence in genetics specifically and biology for separate ancestry and a literal Adam and Eve. So I put out episode 1 about a week ago. So it's over an hour and a half. It's comprehensive. And so please check that out if you haven't yet seen it. And I am currently finalizing the last few slides and information, I guess you could say, for episode 2, which will focus on everybody's favorite topic, genetic entropy. And so with that, Professor David McQueen, good to have you back, my brother. Luca Medugno, I'm assuming you're back as well. There he is. There he is. And so we're now entering the discussion phase of the debate, which is everybody's favorite part of a debate, of course, where the debaters get to bounce ideas off of each other and just keeping it free flowing, asking each other questions. Luca, you did just end with your rebuttal, your 8-minute rebuttal. So, David, we're going to allow you to pick the first topic, ask the first question, and basically just kick us off in this discussion portion for 30 minutes. So I will keep I'll keep an eye on the timer. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Okay. I want to give Luca adequate time to critique me because now I've enjoyed so much our mafioso hats, but I've got to take them off now because during this portion, I have to be a bit more critical of my friend Luca philosophically. And what I want to do is help the audience to understand why I've come to view the Bible as a reliable historical document, but the document from which the fellow who crafted the round boat that Luca taught us about, I'm not convinced that his foundational data is as reliable as the Bible. And so, one thing I'd like for Luca to address as we go along here is the issue of authority. I have some references that indicate that Noah's Ark was essentially a barge like flows on rivers in floats is the word I'm trying to say. Floats on rivers in Europe and America and Canada. It has no sail. It has no rudder. It is being directed from the Bible by God's hand as it moves in the water. But scientifically, because of this ratio of 30 cubits to 300 cubits, or converting it to metric, it's still a ratio of 1 to 10, makes it a very stable vessel. Now, I'd like to end this time by making one comment about Luca has correctly pointed out that if you have methane, a methane gas buildup in your house, and you bring some candles close to that methane, you can go boom, you can have an explosion. Well, I think that by allowing the waste from the animals to fall to the lowest most part, in other words, beneath the first deck, if you want to count them 1, 2, 3, going up, down in the very hold of the ship, that it would reduce the amount of methane, even if we wanted to talk about it scientifically in parts per thousand, parts per million, percent even. Whereas if Noah and the others had candles throughout all this square footage of the ark, there would be adequate room to see it. What do you think of that argument, Luca?
Yes, I think that, first of all, those animals are dangerous even in the open, because you cannot have an open flame close to these animals. I know some guys that got some burns from that. So yeah, it's quite dangerous even in the open. But I want to know if we want to prove this kind of story. I propose to do an experiment. Of course, I cannot do it. It's not that simple, but I was thinking if we take some people and we can scale the experiment, because of course we have 8 people caring for the animals for, I think we need to give them at least 4. 6 hours a day to rest. So it's not like they can do it all day.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Yes, I agree with that. Keep going.
Yes. So we can take a different number of people, less people, caring for the animals for less time to be able to be safe in the experiment. And we do not even need a boot. We can do it inside a building. We take a number of animal. We can cut the number of animal because 4,000 animals are a lot. With those kind of I can if we cut the hours, we can cut the animals too. So we can have less animals, less people, close them, respecting the ratio of what was in the ark. And we can do an experiment like that. You think that that will be possible? And of course, it will be nice to recreate the ark itself, like Irwin did. Of course, the version of Irwin was much smaller, and his model was a third of the original. But at least he did create the boat itself.
Okay, let me respond to your critique about uh, animals and open flames and people in close proximity to the manure of animals. Let me try to get rid of some of the glare on my whiteboard here. There we go. That's better. Luca, several years ago, 10 years ago, Ms. McQueen and I went to Scotland to find our roots. This tartan that I have on tonight is the McDonald tartan. This is my wife's tartan. My clan, the McQueen clan, was a subdivision, a part of this clan. And so we went to Scotland, to the Isle of Skye, and we found her museum, the McDonald Museum, very elaborate. And while we were there, we visited what were called crofters' cabins, I guess I would call them, but they're more like a very small building. And in the 1800s, the husband and wife and how many ever children they had lived under the same roof with numerous sheep and cattle. And what I have drawn here as a solid doorway between the two that I now am going to put in the orange there, that was really open. And so the way that these houses were constructed, there was an open fire in the middle. And in the winter, it had to be closed up because of the extreme weather. I don't recall from the history of Scotland any of these places blowing up because obviously the animals were producing manure, which would have produced methane gas. I hope you could see my point that, you talk about doing an experiment. It's true. We can't do an experiment where you and I and our families get on a ship and let it go for several months and see what happens. Do we blow ourselves up? Do we suffocate from manure and so forth? The example from Scotland, in my mind, gives us an analogy, if you will, to what you're suggesting. Does that hold true in your thinking, Luca?
Well, we have some difference. First of all, those kind of structure usually are well ventilated. Of course, when you have a ventilation, you have far less danger of explosion or things like that. to have an explosion with a cow, a small explosion with a cow with an open flame in the open is still possible. We I think you don't know it, but I went to a school specialized with those things. I had those animals in my school, and we were advised to not bring lighter close to the animal, because if you have an open flame and the cow is barking at you, you can get
Yeah.
burned. And
Now,
it
I'd
did
like to,
happen. So of course we were very young students. I never smoke in my life, but a lot of people did, and the danger was somewhat real. If you have a good ventilation, of course, you can have flames. You need to have a concentration of gas to have a small explosion, of course. But if you have isolated boat, because if water cannot go in, does mean that it's somewhat isolated, you will have a much acute problem at that point. And the boat itself, for what I can tell from the description, was not well ventilated at all. You need to have a two series of openings to have a good ventilation. If you have an house and you are in a room all closed except for one window, you will get to the point you do not have much ventilation in that room if you have only one opening. You need at least two. And that's a problem when you are in a boat.
well, let me respond to that with 2 points. I want to come to the issue of the hibernation of animals during that 1 year on board the ark, but I want to address this issue of ventilation by going back to Genesis chapter 6. Again, as I've argued, I view this as data, historical data. And let me read what it says. Right after the dimensions of the 300 by 30 by 50 are given, in Genesis 6:16, it says, "A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shall you finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it." And then it talks about the beginning of the flood. But let's think about this. In a cubit you shall finish it. Bible scholars, going back really hundreds of years, have imagined, I think accurately, what that 1 cubit is being talked about. And I'll acknowledge a point you made earlier. We think that most people, and when I've tested this with my own students that are past adolescence at least, the length of a cubit is about from the forefinger to the elbow, or about 18 inches, just like this model. So if we imagine that cubit at the very apex of the ark, the way that it's most often drawn is that, remember that the ark is this barge. And so when you look at it in 3 dimensions, it's what would be called a parallelepiped. In other words, it's a solid, not cube, but this rectangular shape. Well, as people have imagined what this top would be like, you've got an area there that would be about this length, but because of the creativity of Adam and the 7 others, He had many years to build this, and he could build a louvered system. I'll use my notebook here as an example. Build a louvered system that when the waves came up a bit higher, it would go down across this entire. And since it's such an international audience, I want to make sure that I get my data in meters. So we're saying that this distance is 140 meters. And through that whole length, this thing would flop down and keep the water from coming in and then open back up for ventilation. And you can further imagine what this would be over that entire length. But now, so that's one point I want you to address. And then secondly is an issue I have not brought up yet, that creationists have been talking about at least since World War II. So World War II, 78 years, 80 years ago, plus we've got the 21st century here. So for the past 100 years, creation scientists like Dr. Henry Morris, the late Dr. Henry Morris, have looked at these issues and said, well, what if when the creatures got on board the ark, Noah gave all of them their first big heavy meal, and they began to behave like bears. Teach me some Italian here. A bear in Italian is what word is that?
Orso.
Orso. So imagine they're all like a bunch of bears. They were so filled up by that meal that they simply went into a hibernation cycle. Now, my overall argument is that the 8 people could have taken care of the, and I very much appreciate the number you put up because it's very close to the number that I had talked about earlier. You know, if the kind is at the level of a family, then that would be around 4,000 different animals. And your number was similar to that. Do you think this concept of hibernation and the concept of this 140 meter long window would help my argument?
Yes. So first of all, the part about the window, a window like that will not help much in a boat. You will would have much better ventilation with the door open at the side of the boat, but I think it will be not feasible during
yes,
the time of the flood, because if you open the door, you are in danger of the water getting in.
yes.
So you can you will have just the window on top, and it's not good at all for ventilation. You need at least other 2 sets of opening to have a good ventilation. For a boat like that, you will need mechanical ventilation, to be honest. But I think we can test that somewhat. You do not need to build the boat as it was in your point of view. You can build a much smaller structure and try it out. I think that's something like that, for what I can understand, does not work for ventilation. Even with a very big opening on the top, you would have problems with the ventilation of the 3 decks. So no, like
Now,
that does not work.
what about this whole business of hibernation?
Yes,
like
I
the bear?
was getting that, and you can have just one of the two, because very young animals do not go in hibernation. um, older animals would go in hibernation, but it will be quite a stretch to think that some kind of animals will stay in that state during the whole year without a problem inside a boat like that.
Donnie,
Also, a lot of animals do not go into hibernation, and you would need to demonstrate that something like a giraffe will go in hibernation, and that's a
now,
problem.
Donnie has indicated we have about 11 minutes left. I don't want to hog all the questions. Please, Luca, ask me a question based on your very nice PowerPoint presentation and let me respond to it.
Yes, I will know if it will be possible to set up an experiment like that, like the ones I presented, like to put some people inside a very big building with a number of animals. We can, of course, cut the number of animals, but we can reproduce somewhat the condition of the ark in safety. Um, and if will be possible to test the structure of the ark for the ventilation problem.
Okay, let me respond to that using something that you guys in Europe for sure have followed with interest. And that is, I assumed you watched the World Cup, the soccer match, did you, on TV?
Mm-hmm. I
Um,
do not follow sports. I'm just a huge nerd, but
well, I I looked it up for the purposes of this debate. Um, a a you know, in America we use the word field, but when you play
mhm.
soccer over an area, it's called a pitch. Is that correct? A soccer
Uh,
pitch,
we use the field to
a
campo da
field.
calcio.
Also. But anyway,
It's
whatever it's called, uh, the World Cup was played on a surface area of almost 8,000 square yards, 7,600 square yards, or about 8,000 square meters. Um, the um, the ark itself, and I've got the figure here. The ark itself, just one floor of the three floors, would be an area of about 3,200 square meters. And so the one floor of the ark would be, and I can round that down, let's round it down to 3,000 square meters. And so it would take almost all three of the floors to equal the surface area of a soccer field. I would argue that that much surface area, that much square footage, could be dealt with much in the way that our house here in Louisiana, we live in a house that's quite old, but it's got about 3,000 square feet of area in it. It's heated by natural gas, methane, and we light candles all the time. We do not purposefully have an exhaust system, um, but we go in and out of doors, so there's circulation within our house. I would answer your critique in this way. Even if these small animals, like sheep, for example, were to go into, would need to be dealt with day after day, the proximity of a flame. Now, I'm a city boy. I don't know what happens if you bring a candle into a barn with sheep and horses. I don't know whether they go nuts or whatever. So I don't know that. But I also know that it's the clear teaching of the Bible, and I've got that written down here, Jeremiah 32:7, it's talking about God's provision with mankind, and nothing is too hard for him, for God. And so I'm sure there was a divine presence in this whole process. One question in our previous debate that I don't think I ever asked you is, what is your own thinking? Do you believe in a supernatural, or is our world simply naturalistic?
So I'm open to almost anything. I'm not a scientist, but let's give me that. But it's possible to have supernatural things. Yes, it's theoretically possible. But when we look at something with science, we need to prove something. If you factor in miracles and things like that, you can have almost anything. They both have some structural problems, but if you have a miracle, it's not a problem. The animals produce too much waste, sorry, and you need to care for them, things like that. You can have a magical sleep. The animals can be fine after a year. The problem with this kind of things is where does it stop? Because if you have the supernatural factor in, you can have almost anything. Why God did not make the animals disappear for a year with Noah and make them reappear a year later? You can have anything.
Well, your point
Like
your
that.
point on that is very well taken. And um, as a creation science that has been studying this for I don't know, 40 years, 50 years, one of the concerns I have is, how do we limit the number of miracles during the time of the flood? No question, from that passage in Jeremiah and from my own belief, that miracles have occurred. We celebrated the virgin birth last week. And so there's no question that throughout the Bible, there are a number of occasions that miracles have occurred. So that's the Bible believing side of David McQueen. The fact that I'm a geologist and been trained in science, I have this need to limit the number of miracles during the time of the flood, so that it's not the situation that every dinosaur or every cow or every spider was kept alive by a miraculous event. One thing, as the discussion goes on with the audience participation here in a minute, that I'd like to return to is this issue of, what if the average size of a creature on board the ark is not what was thought 100 years ago, the size of a sheep, but rather about the size of a rat? Uh, that means that there are actually very few, very large animals that need to come on board the ark. Can you see my argument about limiting the number of miracles?
Yes, but as soon you have miracles, you can have basically anything because, as I said, you can have smaller animals that sleep all the time. The problem is we cannot reproduce something like that. So to give something like that, we will need a lot of proof, like to have to find the preserved ark somewhere and with Noah's name in it or things like that. That will be a good point of evidence for it. But without it, how can we know? It's possible to have the ark with miracles. Well, if the structural problems of the boat are not a problem because God was watching and keeping the ark together, we can have the ark. We can have animals with completely different biological functions back then, so we can solve a lot of the problem. You can say that the all gases problems like that was solved somewhat by God.
Your point is
Where
your
we go
point is
from that?
your point is well taken, and I had a chance to go to eastern Turkey. I got within 10 miles of Mount Ararat. Perhaps in the summer, in around your birthday, maybe in April or on in the summer, we have another debate about whether there's any evidence of the ark on the mountains of Ararat. I wanted to narrow this to feasibility. Does that make sense, Donny?
Absolutely. Why don't we do this with the time remaining? There's only a couple of minutes. Why don't we get one final question or objection from, I guess, whoever you guys think would be fair? You know, who's asked the least amount of questions,
I
and
give
then
that to McQueen
okay.
gladly.
Yeah, well, that's kind of you. So let me challenge you, Luca, on this issue. Even though you and I cannot build a full size model of the ark in Italy or in Louisiana, what you and I both could do is build one that is about this length. At the school you teach at, is there an indoor pool? What would be called a
No, no, no,
natatorium? Um,
no. I'm teaching at an elementary school, so we do not have a
I
pool.
see. But in your community, there must be swimming pools and
Yes, yes.
so forth. You and I could both take this with our families watching, and we could put it in the water and then try to generate as big a wave as we could. And where I've got the word beam written on this, we could see if we could flip it over. My argument to you, and I'm curious your opinion on this, is a barge more stable than a sailboat?
Well, the ark would float, but the problem is we cannot reproduce at scale the ark, because if you do, you will need to have a very small ark. It's not like you can have a reproduction, accurate
Yes,
reproduction that
yes, I
small.
understand.
So when you have a boat that big, your problem is that the material itself do not keep up with the dimension of the boat for what we can understand right now. So create a smaller version is not it's feasible, and that would be floating, but you need to factor in the dimension of the ark, because that's a problem, because with wood you cannot have a structure that big for what we can understand.
Luca, do you
That's
think
the
we could
problem.
pause now and take some questions from the audience?
Yes, give me a second because I need a sip of water.
Gentlemen, that is 30 minutes, actually a little bit over. So that's good. I appreciate all the points discussed. Excellent debate on a very important topic, the feasibility of Noah's Ark. I like getting a diversity of topics in here to debate in the greater world of creation versus evolution. So, with that, let's stick to the format. We do have 5-minute concluding statements where David and Luca can wrap up their thoughts and their points for the debate so far. And we've got an audience Q&A period. So I've got all the questions saved with some really fantastic questions for you gentlemen. So with that, Luca, let's give you the
Yes.
first
So
closing statement.
I think we did a good conclusion back then. We can have Noah's ark, not with the current condition. If you have miracles, everything is possible. That's my problem with the ark. If you ask my point of view, I think that Noah's Ark was somewhat a real story. I do not think that was exactly like in the Bible. I think that someone got a boat, he survived to a big flood, and he did bring some animals with him. I do not think that the flood was global. I do not think that we had back then 4,000 animals or so, all the kinds of animal. I think that was a much smaller event. Still, we have a very good story told by numerous people, very different people, Babylonians and things like that. But no, I do not think that the story was exactly as told in the Bible. That's my closing statement.
Well, thank you very much, Luca, for that closing statement. David McQueen, you have 5 minutes. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, good. And thank you, Luca, for that viewpoint, because it helps me refine my thinking. I'm going to note my clock for the 5 minutes. And I want to start this way. I have a collection of National Geographic magazines. This particular one comes from when I was a boy back in the 50s. National Geographic magazine has been asked on a number of occasions, what would be the archaeological discovery that would be of greatest interest to the readers of your magazine? And they've been asked this question for over 100 years. The president of National Geographic in my boyhood in the 60s responded to this by saying, if we found pieces of a wooden boat anywhere from 17,000 feet on Mount Ararat, perhaps it's been broken and down lower, pieces of it, that would prove the Bible, because without a global flood, there's no way to get a boat of this size, almost 150 meters, 450 feet, up to that elevation. And so the issue of the importance of the ark comes to the forefront. And as I said earlier, perhaps Luke and I this coming year can debate the evidence about whether the ark is actually on Ararat. Many of you may be aware of a very well-known critic of Christianity and creation, Dawkins. Dawkins, back in 2009, wrote this book, The Greatest Show on Earth, which he is claiming that evolution is that great show. And notice what he says here as part of his argument. This is from page 268 of the book. He says this: it's almost too ridiculous to mention it, but I am afraid I have to, because more than 40% of the American population, who I've talked about before, they accept the Bible literally, think that the geographical distribution of animals, that they know what the geographical distribution of animals should look like if they had all dispersed from Noah's Ark. And then he goes into an argument that Donny has covered in the past, this whole argument of species diversity that I'll save for him. This issue of Noah's Ark is of interest to a group like National Geographic, and it's certainly of an interest to the agnostic evolutionary community. How do we respond to it as Christians? If you have your Bibles, you can turn with me to Matthew chapter 24. And my point is that every scientific endeavor, every theological endeavor needs to circle back to the person of Jesus Christ. I have reached the conclusion in my 70 years of life that Jesus is exactly who he said he was. He wasn't a legend. He wasn't a liar. He certainly wasn't a lunatic, but rather he was the Lord of all creation. So notice what he says in Matthew 24, beginning with verse 37. But as the days of Noah were, so also the coming of the Son of Man shall be. For in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. From previous discussions, you may recall that this guy Petchkus believes there may have been a worldwide population of 150 million. Dr. Henry Morris believes there may have been as many as 1 billion people alive. This passage says that life was going on as usual for these hundreds of thousands of people. They did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So shall be the coming of the Son of Man. Then there shall be two in the field, one shall be taken, the other left, and so forth. 42 says, watch therefore, for you know not what hour the Lord doth come. As a father and a grandfather now, someone that has had the opportunity to teach the Bible over the years, you have to understand that this argument over Noah's Ark, it's not only a barge, but it's a refuge. The 8 people on board were all that were left of a population of millions.
30 seconds.
The animals on board the ark formed the gene pool, if you will, of all the animals that have lived after the time of the ark. And so, as a flood geologist, when I show fossils and so forth, they are evidences of judgment, death, and destruction. Luca's overall point of view that evolution uses time plus chance and impersonal forces leads to a wrong conclusion, I think.
David, thank you very much for that closing statement. Gentlemen, Luca, David, excellent debate. I appreciate, Luca, especially you filling in very late notice. But again, you've debated this topic in the past, Luca. And so you were prepped, you were ready to go. I think it was meant to be. And so with that, guys, also let me say this. Thanks for keeping it very professional and intelligent and very easy to moderate. So I basically just got to sit back, relax, and drink my coffee. So great job to the both of you. And let's get into some questions.
It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine, Luca. So with that, let's start from the beginning. This question comes in from Nikia Boyer, and it's for Luca. If man can build the 6-masted schooner Wyoming, which was 450 feet long, if God is truly who he claims to be, couldn't he design an ark that was 510 feet and tell Noah precisely how to make it?
Well, it's possible. The Wyoming did a lot of problems. It sunk, if I remember correctly. So the problem is the material. You can have all the best design of the world, but you still have problems with it. With wood, of course, you can have much bigger boats with with steel and things like that. With wood, you will have a problem, not less.
Luca, thank you. David, over to you for your response.
We need to keep in mind a very interesting and fascinating part of what the Bible says. and that is that the ark was coated or waterproof inside and out. Now, you can make a wooden vessel waterproof by coating the outside of it with a tarry substance, whether that substance comes from a tree, the way Dr. Henry Morris thought it did, or whether, as I think, it was a petroleum-based product, a tar, perhaps. You can make it waterproof by just on the outside. I wonder why they insisted that it be waterproofed on the inside also. This very large vessel that came to our attention through the audience, I don't doubt that Luke is correct that this ship, the Wyoming, eventually sank. It was man-made. It was not a barge like I've described, and it certainly wasn't waterproofed inside and out. A fascinating topic for Luke and I to return to in the spring or summer is if any of the evidence of Noah's Ark being in the mountains of Ararat indicate a waterproofing. That would be interesting to find, would it not, Luca?
Yes. I have the closing statement with this question, right?
You get the last word, Luca. Question was for you.
So the problem is with the wood itself. There are no example of wood able to withstand that big of a boat. You will need to use different materials. The Wyoming was made with much more modern techniques, and it still sunk. That's the problem. You will be able, in theory, to get a magical wood able to withstand that kind of forces, maybe, but right now you cannot. Wood will bend, and the boat would eventually sink, especially with the Bronze Age technology without water pumps. The Wyoming did add those because the boat was leaking a lot. So Noah's Ark is not feasible with wood, at least.
Okay, thank you, Luca. Next question's for David. So, David, this one comes in from Dave H. Dave's got a question for David. So he's asking you, if all the animals were infants, where did the animals get milk from? As that is essential for infants, and they would be stressed as their parents are dead? ?
Okay, very, very good point. Dave's critique is illustrative of a lot of critiques of Luca and others. They will pick one researcher's idea that somehow the 8 people and people they may have hired went out and found baby T-Rex and baby kangaroos and so forth and brought them to the ark. This does not fit the biblical data. In other words, the actual, again, and I return to this over and over again because I think this is a very important point for us to make on Standing for Truth throughout 2023. By the way, Happy New Year to you, Luca. It is coming up in a couple of days. Notice what it says in the Bible about in Genesis 6:20, of the fowls after their kind and the cattle after their kind, every creeping thing on the earth, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee all food that is eaten, and that you should gather, and it'll be food for you and for them. And thus did Noah, not over 30 days. Some say that he might have had as much as 120 years to gather this together. But the key is babies didn't walk. Let's use a sheep, for example. A male and a female sheep made their way to the ark, walked on board. If the female became pregnant on board the ark and delivered a baby sheep, if I was more of a farm boy, I would know what that's called. But at any rate, a baby sheep could have received milk from that mother. And so, David, I have to comment that your question is foolish.
David, appreciate it. Luca, over to you. Floor is yours for your response.
With Dave here.
Which Dave?
Dave H. Sorry.
I thought you were David.
I'm
Finally had some
with Dave.
agreement.
I think that's a huge problem. You will need a live mother to give milk. That's one of the many problems of infants on board. You need milk because you need to get a lot of weight, and you get that weight very, very fast. If you take a cow, you will have a very somewhat small animal getting to 0.7 tons in less than a year. That's incredible, but you need a lot of food, you need a lot of milk, and you need a lot of resources. Babies on the ark, it's not a very good idea. Not at all. They will be afraid. Animals do not behave well in those circumstances. Just try to bring your cat on a drive with your car. Most of the time, the cat will lose his mind. Just think about something like that, but thousands of times that scale.
I get to make a closing comment, right, Donny?
Yeah, David, you get the last word because the question was for you, brother.
Okay, good. The point I would make is, in my circle of friends, I know 50 living creation scientists, and I have known, past tense, another 20 or so that have passed on. Never have I heard them address the idea of infants rolling in the dirt up to the door of the ark and then being put on board the ark. It's always the image, or not the image, the data that we have. Even if you go to antiquity and look at all the different ark legends around the world, they're always ambulatory animals. And so, Dave H., I apologize for being a bit harsh, but sometimes I have to be. Okay, Donny, next question.
Okay, very good, Professor McQueen. Professor McQueen, even when you're harsh, you're still respectful. So I appreciate that.
Well, that's kind of you. If you were my son, I would mess up your hair and whip you, but you're not.
Appreciate it. Okay, well, here we go. Next question comes in from Truth is Beautiful, and it's a question for Luca, the last universal common ancestor. So here we go. You said Irving Finkel's ark was a 1/3 model. Wasn't it a 1/5? What about the Dutch ark that floats on the ocean that is an actual size ark?
Well, it's possible that's 1/5. It's not like I did prepare for this debate, so sorry if I did something wrong. I was remember 1/3. It's possible that's even smaller, but it did still have a scale model of that ark, and that's very interesting. I advise anyone to look at the video. It's very, very good. And Frinkel is a very wonderful guy to see. And the Dutch ark, yeah, but the Dutch ark is not a very accurate representation of the ark at all. I looked it up. It's not like it's going anywhere, that boat, and it's not a real ark. It's not like you can take it and go in open sea. So it's not a good example. Just
Well,
like that.
I want to comment on that. You have done such a wonderful job, Luca, in presenting your viewpoint. Whether Finkel's arc is a 1/3 model or 1/5, to me, doesn't matter. It doesn't match the dimensions that not only, and I guess I should make a bigger point about this, these are the dimensions from the Bible. The 1611 King James is what I've been reading from. And so for over 400 years, people have taken these dimensions. Different people disagree, even very prominent creationists like, I don't want to break this thing here, but very prominent creationists like Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis have a different look to the ark with a bow and a sail and all that kind of stuff. So different people disagree with the barge model of the ark, but I'm not going to add a critique to that. You've done a wonderful job, Luca. We can go to the next question.
Thank you very much, David. Luca, it was for you. So if you wanted a quick final
Yes,
word,
I have nothing to say. For what I can understand, the ark in the Netherlands is not an accurate representation, so we cannot count that up. I will need to study a little bit more of the structure. For what I can understand, there is something under it to keep that afloat, and it's stationary. For what I can understand, the structure it's completely different. I've seen plenty of picture, so that's why I think it's not a good example.
okay, next question comes in from Gate Watchers. And Gate Watcher, he's got a question for you, Luca. Considering buoyancy force, which according to Archimedes' principle is equal to the weight of the volume of fluid the object displaces, wouldn't the arc scientifically work?
So the problem is not buoyancy. If you take just that into account, yes, that will float. The problem is the boat would leak a lot. A lot of water will go inside. I think that the most realistic outcome will be the boat snapping. So it's not like it's just buoyancy. If you take buoyancy, yes, it will float, but there are other problems for it.
Professor McQueen?
Yes, I'll respond to that with one of the comments from earlier. Luca commented about, well, McQueen, what is this magic wood? What is this gopher wood? Well, nobody knows what gopher wood is as far as what species of tree and so forth. But what Luca, I think, is missing, and also which Gate Watchers, I think, has adequately asked the correct question. If you've got an arc this size, the buoyant force, and this is something interesting, even though we can find from the Bible the beam of the ark and so forth, at no point in the Bible does it give the modern shipbuilders term of what is the draft of the ark. Now, some calculations have been made, but it's beyond the scope of what I want to deal with tonight. But I think that the questioner is correct that the buoyant force on the ark is the adequate to keep afloat a 140 meter long boat. And I'm troubled that Luca doesn't immediately see that we're talking about a barge here that is waterproofed inside and out. And so the accusation that Luca makes that it must have leaked is simply not true.
Thank you, David. Luca? Question was for you.
I know that was covered in, I cannot remember the term, but I know that was allegedly waterproof. But if you have the wood bending, and that would happen in the case of the ark, if we take the wood as a material, water will get in, like it did with the winding. It's not like they did not try to get the boat, the wood of the boat waterproof in that case. But it will not work simply as that.
Okay, question from Centurion 737. Thank you for the question. Question for Luca, the atheist and evolution. Okay, so he's saying the atheists and evolutionists like to use the USS Wyoming as evidence that the ark could not float. How long was the Wyoming in service? Answer was over 10 years. Any thoughts on that, Luca?
Yes, and that boat did have massive problems. It was needed to pump out, to take out the water from the boat because it was leaking a lot. Without pumps, you will be have a big problem very, very fast. Even with pumps and things like that, the Wyoming did sunk after just 10 years. Boats are made to last much longer. It's not a good thing. And just think about something like that during a flood. You do not need a boat bending and getting inside the water during a worldwide flood. I hope you agree on that.
Thank you, Luca. David, floor is yours.
Yes. The Wyoming was a modern ship, Luca, which apparently was in service for 10 years. Let's keep in mind that the ark was decades in construction, waterproofed in and out, and was intended by God to last a little over a year. Everybody had a birthday on board the ark. Now, I want to bring up something that I'd like you and I to talk about next year, and that is the evidence that we have of the ark being on Mount Ararat, or at least in the mountains of Ararat. 10 years ago, I was privileged to be part of an expedition to go look at some wood, supposedly, that a group of Chinese Christians, Hong Kong Christians, had found on the mountains of Ararat. It turned out that what they had found was a unique igneous rock called Pele's Hair, which we can talk about in the future. But what is my point? my point is that Ark researchers for the last 20 years have identified a piece of the Ark, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, down, not at 17,000 feet, but at a lower elevation. I don't know the exact number, something like 13,000 feet. And individuals have actually gone up and touched this boat, this piece of it, and have seen the waterproofing. The waterproofing over the last number of years, keep in mind that Abraham lived about 2000 BC. So the wood is over 4,000 years old in the mountains of Ararat. This wood is so dense and so hard that if you stand maybe 50 meters away from it, it looks like just another basaltic rock on Ararat. But different ones have gone to it. Now, I'm talking about in the last 20 years, and have looked inside it, and there's actually stalls and so forth, which you can find. Now, why, Luca, wouldn't an Italian like you and an American like me join with some of these guys in the Netherlands? Why couldn't we go and actually climb to that elevation and look at this? Well, the problem is world politics. We know that the answer to world politics is the Lord Jesus himself, but the current situation is that the Ark resides in one of the areas most argued about in world history. There's a whole group of people that some consider to be freedom fighters that are arguing, oh no, this is Kurdistan. We should be able to find it. A whole nother group are very careful followers of Islam, and they believe that the Ark is not in the mountains of Ararat, where Mount Ararat is, near Doyuba is it, but rather is it down in an area named Mount Udi. So from my own experience, I think that people that are alive today have actually touched the Ark, but because of religious and geopolitical reasons, very hard to get to.
Thank you, David. Luca, you get the last word. Go ahead.
So, if we get, first of all, I would love to make such a trip with McQueen. It would be a blast.
It would be a good trip.
If you have something like that, that will be definite proof. Of course, you will need to take a sample to, if the Ark is some 1,000 years old, you can get a DNA from the wood. You can know what gopher wood is.
Yes.
You would be able to have much needed data on it. If something like that is real and it's been found, it's definite proof. I'm skeptical because as for now, we do not have analysis on this wood. I do not know, and I looked for it for any Ark found. So yeah, if you find an Ark like that with that kind of wood, that will be quite definite proof of the existence of the Ark. I would love to debate the topic. On the question, sorry. Yeah, the warming did add a lot of problems, so it's not a good example at all. The Ark was even bigger, and that would be even more problematic for a boat.
Luca, thank you so much. And what we're going to do is wrap it up here. That is, we just hit the 2-hour mark, and that is the time we have for audience questions. As always, I want to thank our awesome audience for being so engaged in these important topics. We've had a ton of questions come in, as we usually do at these debates. So let's get some final words, final thoughts. Again, David and Luca, thank you so much for giving us your time for these important debates. You both are seasoned at this point. So let's get some final words. Luca, let's start with you.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Luca.
The conclusion is seems that we need to have a couple of other debates with Professor
Yes.
McQueen.
Yes.
I cannot wait for it. I simply love McQueen. It's very fun to debate him, to speak with him. I would love to have this wonderful expedition to find the Ark. I would love to do it. Count me on if you want to go. And yeah, I want to give my best wishes to you too, because I do not think we hear from each other for the new year. So Happy New Year in advance. And I
Happy
want
New Year.
to wish the same to the people in the chat.
Yes.
Well, Luca, Happy New Year to you as well. This is not your first time here. You've done these debates plenty of times. So for anybody who wants to see more from Luca, check out those debates and also check out Luca's channel. David, thanks again for doing this.
Yeah.
And David, I want to thank you. I know we started a bit later since the original debater was a no-show, but Luca was kind enough to fill in.
Yes.
So David, over to
And
you,
I've
brother.
figured out a way that you, Donny, and Standing for Truth can reward Luca and me. If you can get him about 10,000 euros and then get me about $10,000, that would be enough money to travel to, you got to go through Istanbul, Ankara. You've got to go all the way to Eastern Turkey. I'm going to need $1,000 worth of insulated clothing, not being a mountaineer. But since Donny is so kind to pay me and George and the rest of his staff in Chinese yen, we usually get about 100 yen a year, which I think is $4. Let's do the calculate. What's the conversion between a euro and a yen? Listen, I love you guys. And I very much appreciate this very important topic. I'm so thankful to you, Luca, that in the middle of the night you got up to do this. Thank you so much. Donny, as George always says, I'm going to move my cursor and say good night if I can find my cursor. There we go. I am leaving the studio.
Well, God bless David. I was
Thank you.
going to say, as David's leaving here, David and George and the rest of my staff have done such an excellent job in 2022 that I think for 2023, I'm going to get them that well-deserved raise and maybe an extra week of vacation. So with that.
Oh, wonderful. Now it goes to
I can do it.
200 Chinese yen.
Oh, yeah. Okay, David and Luca, thank you so much for the debate. 2 hours has
It
flown
was a
by.
pleasure. Good night.
Get some
Good
sleep,
evening,
Luca.
I think.
God bless.
But do we have evidence that large-scale changes occur? Yeah, we have the fossil record, and it really is a record, and it's so much so that he can't even pretend to refute it. He just has to pretend it's not really evidence.
But anybody in this room who calls yourself a Christian, if you think you have scientific evidence to indicate you're God, bring it. You ain't got it. I win.
How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain.
All we've ever seen in the history of humanity is variations happen with limits. But you really think an amoeba turned into a shark and a whale and everything? There's no evidence of a single-celled creature ever producing even a two-celled creature, let alone an elephant or a whale or a human. But they put them on, draw lines on paper. The evolution theory clearly teaches the Earth began as a hot ball of rock. As it cooled down, it began to rain, and it rained on the rocks for millions of years and turned them into soup, and the soup came alive. Wade, simple question. Do you believe you are related to a snail? Just a yes or no.
Yeah.
One more thing. Next time we have a debate, instead of a possum hat, Wade, I got the perfect hat for you to wear. Right here.
Oh, hold on.
With your SpongeBob imagination. Just imagine you're related to a possum.
I don't have any tinfoil, but I'm sure you've got some tinfoil. You can make a hat.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Everyone's
stuff.
in on it, right?